This section explains why life resists definition when we have only one example of it. One sample cannot found a definition. Every criterion for life, Schrödinger's negative entropy, Davies's 6 verbs, the Sagan and NASA formulation of a chemical system capable of Darwinian evolution is calibrated against the single lineage we happen to inhabit, the DNA line. So none of them can separate the necessary from the merely line. This is overfitting to n equals 1. A classifier trained on one instance memorizes that instance and reads everything else as noise. That is exactly what a checklist for life does when the checklist is built from the only life we have ever seen. The chapter's work is deliberately negative. It dissolves the confidence a checklist promises so that life as we do not know it becomes thinkable at all. Such life might be dispersed, merely chemically interacting, perhaps already here in the viruses we refuse to count. You cannot recognize what you've only ever defined by example. This section explains why life is best defined by what it does, rather than what it is made of. Define a thing by what it does, not by what it is made of, and life stops being a substance. Ward's chapter turns on that single move. Strip a bacterium molecule by molecule, the fantastic voyage anchor, and no part of it is alive. Life is the pattern, self-sustaining, replicating, evolving chemistry. Sagan called it a chemistry. Sagan called it a chemical system capable of Darwinian evolution. The life is the pattern, not the carbon carrying it. Here is the surprise that shifts the whole model. What varies across worlds is body form. Life itself is singular, one functional pattern, while the substrate that carries it varies without limit. This is a universal property definition. Life is what it does, and that definition generates the chapter's heresies directly. Viruses, prions, even whole ecosystems qualify wherever the pattern runs, with cellularity optional. This section explains why the second chapter stops trying to define life in general and defines our life instead. Chapter 1 asked what life is and failed, because the universal set of all possible life has no clean boundary. So, this chapter inverts the question. Stop defining life. Define our life sharply enough that its complement becomes visible. You cannot recognize the alien until you have drawn the template of the familiar. The not us is only legible against a crisp us. Ward names that us, Teroa. It is the lineage built on DNA and RNA, a one-way code, exactly 20 amino acids, a phospholipid membrane, water as solvent, and a carbon scaffold, all of it descending from a single ancestor called Luca. Here is the generative move. Every one of those traits is contingent rather than necessary, a knob that history happened to set one way. Each knob you could turn otherwise defines one axis of possible life that is not Teroan. This part explains why defining Terran life had to come first, before anyone could name its alien counterpart. A definition is a boundary, and a boundary stayed invisible and unquestioned. Taxonomy spent centuries partitioning life internally into genus, species, kingdom, yet it never drew the outer wall around Earth. Life as such. Darwin's single ancestor doctrine left exactly one instance visible, and with no knot. This to point at, the category stayed invisible and unquestioned. The chapter's whole task is to manufacture that missing contrast class. It defines Terran life sharply enough that its complement, life as we do not know it, becomes a nameable thing rather than a blank. You cannot hunt the alien until you have drawn the precise edge of the familiar. Ward draws it, to his everlasting infamy among classically trained biologists. This part reframes alien life as a parameter space rather than a bestiary. Take everything Terran life is, its genome, its handedness, its solvent, its backbone element, and treat each one as a dial rather than a fixed fact. The space of possible life is then the product of those dials, bounded by exactly two constraints. It must be chemically permissible, and it must be chemically permissible, and it must be able to form. That inversion is the chapter's generative move. It turns the vague instruction, imagine an alien, into a disciplined sweep outward from the smallest deviation, a rewritten codon, a reversed chirality toward non-carbon, non-DNA exotica. Wald's epigraph licenses the whole exercise. Learn biochemistry here, he writes, and you pass examinations on Arcturus. The rules are universal, so familiar life is only one sample of them, never the law itself. A handbook of aliens is just Terran biology, read as a parameter space. This section frames how to think about alien biology. Alien biology becomes a search problem. You take the space of possible life and filter it by two predicates, chemically permissible and able to actually form, then order what remains by distance from the one worked example we hold. Earth's Chian life. That ordering is the chapter's generative move. Every later case is a question of how far from Terran it sits along one axis: syntax, chirality, genome, solvent, or backbone element. The surprise that should update you most is that the constraints bite hard rather than softly. Silicon sits directly under carbon. It shares carbon's valence. It is abundant. It is the obvious substitute. Yet it fails on bond energetics. Its chains break and its rings will not form. What looks like chauvinism toward carbon and water turns out to be physics, mostly, rather than parochialism. This section explains the reframing that runs through the whole book, the swap from miracle to recipe. A miracle is unaskable. A recipe is innumerable. That single move is Ward's whole method. The origin of life stops being one inscrutable event and becomes a cookbook, an ordered assembly of separately cooked precursors, each demanding its own ingredients and its own ingredients and its own ingredients and its own ingredients and its own oven, a specific energy environment. Having listed the kinds of life in Chapter 3, he now asks, by what route? The recipe frame hands you the search structure directly. For any candidate biochemistry, you ask which precursors, in what sequence, under what energy input, and where each step's conditions contradict the next. The honesty of the frame is built in. You can point at the missing ingredient, the step no known kitchen performs, and admit that we still cannot write our own recipe. This section explains how Ward's fourth chapter reframes the origin of life. Origin of life stops being a miracle the moment you treat it as a recipe, ingredients, proportions, sequence, oven. Ward's move in Chapter 4 converts one unanswerable question, how did life begin, into a cookbook of falsifiable ones, which precursors, assembled in what order, cooked in which energy environment. His kitchen mess anchor carries the logic. Complex chemistry always leaves residue, so no step gets to hide behind wonder. Every recipe must name a mechanism. This inverts the prior chapter. Having catalogued what life could be, he now asks how it could be made. The structural boundary is honest ignorance. The book can list many plausible recipes, yet confirm none. Plurality of pathways is what we know. The true recipe is what we don't. This section explains how life becomes something you can build. Life becomes buildable the moment you stop asking what life is and start asking what life does, metabolize, replicate, evolve. Ward's move is definitional. Fix the function list, and creation collapses from a single miracle into an engineering checklist. Container, information store, energy captures from a single miracle into an engineering checklist. Container, information store, and what EV you're. Each item admits many substrates, so every part you swap for a non-Terran one manufactures an alien. Synthesis and the book's title question are the same operation. The program then factors along two independent axes. The first is bottom-up, assembled from chemicals, versus top-down, strip a living cell. The second is protein, first versus information. First, Frankenstein is reframed as a decision matrix. Predict the field's shape from that grid alone. 4 research fronts, each realizing one function in an unfamiliar material. This section explains how defining life by function frees its chemistry from any fixed substrate. Define life by what it does, metabolize, replicate, evolve, and its chemistry falls out of the definition. The substrate goes free. That one move is the chapter's engine. Making life stops being a Frankenstein taboo and becomes a 4-step engineering checklist. Accumulate monomers, join them into polymers, wrap them in a membrane, and make the whole thing replicate. It can be pursued either bottom-up, assembling from scratch, or top-down, stripping a living cell toward its minimum. Here is the consequence the rest depends on. Because no step names DNA, the first success need not resemble Earth life at all. To synthesize life is therefore to synthesize an alien, Ward's title made operational. The open question is no longer whether, it is only replication fidelity and membrane genome coupling. This section explains why a second, undiscovered form of life could be living on Earth right now without us ever detecting it. The instrument defines its own blindness. We take a census of life by sequencing DNA or ribosomal RNA, so anything not built on that chemistry is not merely undiscovered. It is invisible, projected onto a basis it does not occupy. This is Ward's dirty secret. A second Genesis could persist on Earth now, RNA, cellular life, ribosome-less, orthogonal to every probe we run, and we would read it as absence rather than presence. The idea of one biosphere is an artifact of measurement, not a finding. The chapter's work in the book is to drag alien life from out there to possibly underfoot, unrecognized, and to indict the asymmetry. SETI scans the stars while Lederberg's phosphate, poison test for shadow life, goes unattempted. This section explains why a census can miss what it was never built to detect. Every census counts only what its instrument is built to register. Ward turns this on Earth's own biosphere. We identify life by reading its ribosomal RNA. So a lineage without ribosomes returns nothing, and that nothing reads as absence. His candidate is RNA. Cellular life, the stepping stone that maybe never went extinct. The null result is manufactured by the probe, not the territory. Venter's 148 unknown bacteria and the lost city vents show how much the paradigm already misses. A whole shadow dominion could saturate the planet invisibly. The chapter's job, before the alien hunting to come, is to dissolve the reflex that reads no evidence as not there. Absence of evidence is an artifact of the measurement. This section separates two questions. Our intuition tends to fuse where does life begin and where does it live. Panspermia claims the second need not track the first. One Genesis plus a transport channel smears life across a whole solar system. Ward's channel is the impact, ejected rock. A comet strike blasts gravel off a planet, and because only the sand size fraction vaporizes on re-entry, the cool interior ferries its microbial cargo from dead world to dead world. This converts the question of how rarely life starts into the question of how far one star can reach. And the reach has a sharp edge. Solar system distances, yes. Interstellar, no. Aliens throughout the solar system would then be cousins of a single origin, not independent inventions. This section explains the central move of the seventh body, panspermia. Life need not arise where you find it. That single decoupling is the chapter's move. Panspermia converts the origin problem into a transport problem. Biogenesis happens once, anywhere, then diffuses along celestial tramways, comets, asteroids, and ejected rock from dead world to living. The whole argument reduces to clearing 3 gates for a microbe stowed in a gravel-sized meteor. It must survive the blast off a planet, then the long dormant drift, then the fiery re-entry. Ward's thesis for the book is that each gate is now shown passable, so where life is, stops tracking where life began, and the solar system becomes a single, connected habitat rather than a set of isolated origins. This section explains why the 2 innermost planets belong together in one lesson. Habitability is a niche. It is a property of a zone in space and time, not of a whole planet, and the 2 sunward worlds exist in this chapter to make that the entire lesson. Mercury is the null control. No liquid, no envelope, no hope. It exits the argument in a single paragraph. Venus carries the weight, a good planet gone bad. Once Earth's twin, it was cooked into hell by a runaway greenhouse. Once its lost oceans killed plate tectonics and, with them, the planetary thermostat. Yet the living zone did not vanish. It migrated up into the cool cloud decks and back in time to a wet youth. Ward's move is to locate a world's habitable envelope in space and time, and never to ask whether its surface now resembles ours. This section explains what the sunward pair, Mercury and Venus, teaches about habitability. Habitability is a property of a place, and time, never of a whole planet. That is the lesson. Mercury fails absolutely. There is no liquid, ever, so the query returns nothing. Venus fails only under the wrong coordinates. Ask about the surface now, and it is hell, 900 degrees Fahrenheit, a runaway greenhouse that boiled off its water. Shift the epoch, and the young world was Earth-like, the early sun, 30% dimmer, offsetting its nearness. Shift the altitude, and cool clouds carry anomalous chemistry. Missing carbon monoxide, carry anomalous chemistry. Missing carbon monoxide, carbonyl sulfide, chemistry that smells of metabolism. The chapter relocates the niche across the phase space of place and time, rather than judging the globe whole. This section explains why a dead world is the best place to look for the record of life's beginning. Deadness. Read as an archival virtue, that inversion is the whole chapter. Earth erases its own beginning. Tectonics, heat, and climate overwrite every rock older than about 4 billion years, so the record of life's origin is destroyed by the very machine that keeps the planet alive. The moon runs no such machine. During the heavy bombardment from 4.5 to 3.8 billion years ago, impacts flung Earth, Venus, and Mars debris past escape velocity, and some of it settled onto the one nearby surface that never overwrites. Ward called it a witness plate and a planetary attic. A reed, Only medium beside 3 read-write planets becomes their shared archive, pristine early, Earth rock and alien fossils preserved precisely because nothing there has happened since. Look for a lost record on the inert body that caught the copies. This part explains why a dead, inert body is the best archive in the solar system. The dead body is the perfect archive precisely because it does nothing to itself. It records everything done to it. Earth erases its own past. Rain, tectonics, and lava overwrite the first 4 billion years. The moon does none of this, so it keeps what Earth destroyed. This is Ward's move in Chapter 9. During heavy bombardment, impacts flung Earth, Venus, and Mars rock to the moon at escape velocity. Fossils of 3 planets now rest in lunar soil, a witness plate. The generative pattern is this. A system with no internal dynamics becomes a pure recorder of external history. Read the still surface to reconstruct the turbulence around it. Every inert body in the solar system is a memory you could not keep at home. This part explains why the origin of life on Earth may be, at bottom, a glassware problem. Benner's borate pathway to RNA demands exactly what an organic chemist does at the bench. A serial distillation, liquid decanted from flask to flask, evaporating and refining at each step. This is required because borate itself only precipitates as the water dries. Early Earth was drowned. A water world with at most a few islands, so it never had the dry, stepped apparatus that this chemistry needs. Mars did. Linked impact craters descending in elevation, sharing one water table, a natural distillation train laid out across a desert. The move made by Kirschvink and Weiss is to notice that the wettest planet cannot host its own beginning, and the dry one can. Mars stops being a second question. It becomes Earth's missing bench. This section explains why the Viking mission's verdict on Mars is the book's sharpest case of a false negative built into the instrument itself. Viking asked Mars a question phrased in Earth's chemistry and read the silence as death. Terran nutrients, Terran metabolism, Terran organics, and finding none. NASA pronounced the planet sterile, setting the field back decades. Yet the labeled release positive never went away. It was dismissed precisely because the instrument encodes the life it seeks. That is the whole move. A detector is a hypothesis made of metal, so its null refutes the hypothesis and leads the world untouched. Absence of evidence collapses into evidence of absence only when the assay's ontology already matches the phenomenons. Mars is the book's sharpest specimen, the false negative that follows necessarily from searching for life as you know it, with Levin's unretracted descent as the loose thread. This section explains why Europa is the decisive test of a single question: can life exist where sunlight never reaches? Europa is a moon of Jupiter wrapping Io and liquid ocean, perhaps 150 miles deep beneath a shell of ice. What keeps that ocean from freezing is Jupiter's tidal squeezing, not a radioactive core, the Goldilocks heat that is just right. The same tidal working that tortures neighboring Io and leaves distant Callisto dead. The chapter turns on an inversion. NASA's mandate to follow the water misreads the problem, because water is not what life is short of. What life needs is maintained disequilibrium, a redox gradient that cycles oxidants down from the radiation-scorched surface into the reducing deep. And Europa's energy budget runs at 1 part in 10 to the reducing deep. The verdict generalizes. Every dark ocean world stands or falls on energy, not water. This section explains why Europa is the chapter that exposes the book's hidden variable, the true gate that a search for life must pass through. Water is the cheap ingredient, energy is the scarce one, and Europa is where that scarcity gets dragged into the light. Picture a moon with an ocean twice, Earth's volume sealed under ice, cut off from the sun. NASA's creed, follow the water, dies here because water abounds and life still may not. Life is not a solvent. It is a maintained disequilibrium, a redox gradient that needs constant cycling between an oxidized reservoir and a reduced one. Seal the surface ice off from the sea and the cycle starves. Ward's estimate puts the available chemical energy at roughly 1 part in 10 to the 14th power of Earth's. So Europa isolates the true gate. The question is not, is there water? The question is there a sustained free energy flux? This part explains why Titan is the place where the book's central idea stops being abstract. Titan is where the thesis of life as we do not know it stops being a thought experiment and acquires an address. It is a moon large enough to be a planet, wrapped in the only thick lunar atmosphere in the solar system, a ruddy nitrogen and methane smog that photolyzes sunlight into ever heavier organics, raining building blocks onto ever heavier organics, raining building blocks onto a surface of hydrocarbon lakes over a possible ammonia ocean. The move that makes the argument go through is solvent substitution. Swap water for ammonia. Swap oxygen chemistry for methane chemistry. Keep the organic ladder, and you get a candidate biosphere running on a different chassis, reachable by parachute. Titan is the chapter that makes Ward's central claim concrete. You need not leave the solar system to find chemistry that is not ours. This section explains why Titan is the crucial body for the book's argument. Titan is where the book's title stops being a slogan and becomes a chemistry. Every Earth life ingredient has a cold analog here. Water becomes ammonia. Oxygen-bearing organics become nitrogen groups, what is called a monolife. Even carbon yields to silicon. Titan is the one body where all 3 substitutions are on offer at once, in 3 separate reservoirs, the freshwater impact, lakes, the deep ammonia ocean, and the Othenkeens. The step that does the work is Benner's, which Ward calls electrifying. If life is an intrinsic property of carbon's reactivity, then Titan meets every criterion but warm sunlight, disequilibrium, energy, building blocks, so life should be there. Hold. The function of life fixed. Swap the molecules, and the same phenomenon must recur. This section explains why one chapter turns the whole book into a warning. One capability shows 2 faces. The knowledge that lets you recognize life built on a chemistry unlike ours is the same knowledge that lets you build lethal life from scratch. This chapter is the dual-use face of everything the book has taught. Its hinge is a symmetry of contamination. Which is the greater danger, Earth threatened by alien microbes, or other worlds threatened by our stowaways? And there is an inversion that predicts every case. A natural alien threatens you less, the more its biochemistry differs from yours because it cannot engage your machinery. So the deadliest alien is the one engineered here, close enough to hijack your genome. Discovery and weapon are the 2 sides of the alien question. This part of the chapter explains why one capacity has 2 faces. The capacity that finds alien life is the same capacity that builds it, and the chapter's whole weight rides on that symmetry. Ward's sharpest move is the danger gradient. A natural alien threatens you less, the more alien it is, because pathogenicity needs a shared biochemical interface to attack through, and silicon life cannot touch your DNA. The engineered alien inverts this. It is built to share your interface, to turn your own cells non teroan. So the monumental discovery and the weapon of mass destruction are one knowledge, read two ways, blessing and curse. The rarest, most dangerous alien is not 50 light years off. It is made in a lab. This section explains why the manifesto turns a scientific question into a staffing decision. Every world surrenders only one kind of evidence, so the instrument you send is fixed by that form, and prestige of the target has nothing to do with it. Mars was once wet, so it holds a fossil record, and fossils are found by trained perception, not by machines. Ward offers a thought experiment, Land, a fossil hunting rover here on Earth, and it finds nothing, even on a planet drenched in fossils. So a paleontologist goes to Mars. A paleontologist is already a fusion of geologist and biologist, exactly the perception the task demands. Titan surrenders only radically alien chemistry, so a biochemist goes there instead. The manifesto is the book's entire argument collapsed into a hiring rule: match the observer's perceptual schema to the residue the world can leave. From that rule, you can predict any target. The right specialist is simply the world's expected evidence. Read backward. This section states the book's central rule and shows how it plays out across two very different worlds. The whole argument collapses here into one operational rule. The searcher is the detector, and you tune the detector to the kind of evidence the target leaves behind. What you send to look for life has to match how that life would have written itself down. Take Mars. Mars would preserve life as fossils in its old lake beds, so you send a paleontologist. This is Ward's Buick anecdote, and the reason is that fossil hunting is a tacit skill, something a trained eye does that you cannot yet automate. His thought experiment about a robot sent to Earth lands the surprise: a rover dropped onto fossil, which Earth would most likely find. E. Titan is the opposite case. Titan would express life as radically alien chemistry, so there you send a biochemist instead. The whole book becomes a single corollary. Match the cognitive instrument to how the target records life. Note the asymmetry here. The dangerous failure is the right planet read by the wrong eyes. You can arrive exactly where life truly wrote itself down and still come home empty, because the instrument you brought was blind to the script that life used. This part explains the book's final move, the envoy, and the new taxonomic rank it introduces. The whole book climbs one ladder, kingdom, then dominion, each rank defined by a shared origin at some depth, and the envoy tops the ladder once more. Ward's move is to coin a new rank, Arborea, a taxonomic level above dominion, whose unit of shared origin is a single genesis event. That reframes what every rank was all along. Each category is descent from a common root at some depth, and Arborea is the deepest such root, the entire tree grown from one independent origin of life. Distinct geneses are therefore incommensurable trees, unclassifiable together rather than distant relatives on a single tree. The universe stops being firmament or dark matter and becomes a forest of such trees. This is the book's telos, life as we do not know it, earning a rank that presupposes no shared ancestry. This section explains the book's closing move, the rank that sits at the very top of its taxonomy. The move caps the classification the book has been building. Above dominion, the rank ward invents in Chapter 2, for Earth life's deepest split, he erects one more, the Arborea, whose members are all life descending from a single independent genesis. At this height, the taxonomy stops indexing shared descent and starts counting origins. This reframes the cosmos itself. Its fundamental unit becomes a forest of evolutionary trees rather than matter, radiation, or strings, each tree rooted in its own genesis, ours merely one among nearly as many as there are stars. The generative primitive is this: extend a classification until its highest category partitions not variants of one thing, but disjoint instances of the phenomenon. Life may plural at the root,